For me, the fun of writing novels isn't in the finished product. To me, those are like dead skin, the things that are done. But I love the process.
With a career that's defined by both quality and quantity, how do you sum up the legacy of the man they call the King of Horror? Watch on to see us attempt just that feat as we induct Stephen King into the Horror Hall of Fame. Over 4 decades, Stephen Edward King has haunted our collective dreams time and time again. More than 60 novels, 200 short stories, and over 50 television and film adaptations. It's a staggering body of work by any measure. But what else would you expect from the man who began writing stories at the age of 7?
We had a crawl space behind the apartment where we lived in Stratford. Among the stuff were a number of pulp paperbacks, including one by H.P. Lovecraft called The Lurker in the Shadows. And I knew I'd found home when I read that book.
Lovecraft may have helped ignite his early passion for writing, but it was EC Comics that would give a young King his first appreciation for the horror genre. A genre he would end up exploring in his first big success.
For Carrie, it will be a dream come true. For everyone else, it will be a nightmare.
Carrie wasn't the first novel King wrote, but it was the first one he would manage to get published in 1974. Crazily enough, it was one the author had almost thrown out.
Why didn't you want to write the rest of it?
It's too hard, I was lazy, and also it was going to be too long. I didn't understand how I could possibly market something like that, and frankly, I needed the money.
It was swiftly turned into a film from Brian De Palma in 1976, not only receiving Academy Award nominations and box office dollars, but opening the floodgates to a wave of King adaptations that never really stopped. Hollywood, it seemed, had struck a mutually beneficial relationship with the now prolific author, but King was never shy about sharing his opinion on adaptations of his work, even when they involved legendary filmmakers like Stanley Kubrick. When The Shining was released in 1980, the author was somewhat tight-lipped about his thoughts on the beloved adaptation, but in the years that followed he would make his true feelings known, eventually declaring that The Shining was like a big, beautiful Cadillac with no engine inside. He also shared his concerns about the casting of Jack Nicholson, believing Jack Torrance's spiral towards madness would have been more surprising had he been played by someone like Jon Voight, Christopher Reeve, or Michael Moriarty. Perhaps this is what convinced King to take his own crack at adapting his own work.
Hi, my name is Stephen King. I've written several motion pictures, but I want to tell you about a movie called Maximum Overdrive, which is the first one I've directed. Wow!
1986's Maximum Overdrive would fail to ignite the box office, signaling the end of King's brief directing career. But the film would eventually be embraced by audiences as a cult classic.
You want a war? You got one!
As for anyone left wondering why King took such a wild swing for the fences, one need only look at his personal life at the time. Behind the typewriter, he was secretly struggling with a drug and alcohol addiction that would plague him for more than a decade. He would go on to create some of his most acclaimed novels while intoxicated, admitting to having no memory of writing Cujo. King would eventually get clean in the late 80s, followed by a period of intense writer's block, which the author always feared might one day come to pass. But come out the other side he did, proving to himself that despite evidence to the contrary, his true talent always came from within.
Writing a novel is like building a little campfire on an empty, dark plain. And one by one, these characters come out of the dark, and each one has a little pile of wood. And they put it on the fire, and if you're very lucky, before the fire goes out, it's this big bonfire, and all the characters stand around it and warm themselves. And that's the way it's always been for me.
King's personal issues may have put the brakes on his writing career, but his screen adaptations would suffer no such setbacks, as a fresh crop of films began to showcase his more dramatic work. In particular, a series of novellas he wrote as part of the Different Seasons collection. These included the coming-of-age classic Stand By Me, adapted from King's novella The Body, thought to be partially inspired by a traumatic event King witnessed as a child.
You guys want to go see a dead body?
and highest ranking IMDb film of all time, The Shawshank Redemption.
I believe in two things: discipline
Help me, Dad!
and the Bible. Here you'll receive both.
The book's title was slightly shortened from its novella, whilst the character of Red was famously changed from a white Irishman to an African-American prisoner played by Morgan Freeman.
I must admit, I didn't think much of Andy the first time I laid eyes on him. He had a quiet way about him. A walk and a talk that just wasn't normal around here.
Director Frank Darabont would go on to adapt another of King's prison dramas with The Green Mile, as well as the underappreciated monster movie The Mist.
Something in the mist! Something in the mist!
In a risky move, Darabont would change the ending of the novel, which we won't spoil for you here. Suffice it to say the gamble paid off, with the author stating of the bold choice, "It was so anti-Hollywood. Anti-everything really. I liked that." It was during this time between the release of Darabont's two films that King would suffer another personal setback. While on an afternoon walk near his home, King was struck by a van and suffered serious injuries that required multiple surgeries.
The body's an amazing thing, and little by little, it healed itself. And when that happened, and I started to get some energy back, I wanted to write again.
Fast forward to the late 2010s, and with King's back catalogue beginning to dwindle, Hollywood's hopes hung on two high-profile properties. One, a sprawling series of fantasy novels thought to be unadaptable, and the other, a horror remake of a classic King novel originally made for the small screen in 1990. The Dark Tower may have been met with a somewhat lukewarm response, but filmmaker Andy Muschietti, who would replace director Cary Fukunaga, managed to unlock the secret ingredient to both critical and commercial success. With the monster hit, that was it. The film remains the highest grossing horror movie of all time, and was followed by more success 2 years later with It Chapter 2, further cementing Pennywise as one of the great horror characters. The success of It would launch a new phase of big budget adaptations, as studios fell over each other, trying to greenlight every piece of King IP they could get their hands on, from gritty new takes on old films, to long-awaited sequels, and a slew of television shows, including an anthology series centered around the author's own fictional town in his home state of Maine. And with the new series based on the author's longest ever novel just around the corner, it's never been a better time to be a fan of the King.
You, want me to sign it for you?
Nah, I didn't like the ending.